please welcome Nathan Grossman. Nathan, thanks very much for joining us here, wherever here is at the moment. I'm in London, you're, I guess, in Stockholm. I have no idea where anyone else is. But here we are in these little Zoom boxes, which is the way we communicate in this very strange year. But you have made a film about someone who took her message to the world by traveling, by going to Paris, by going to Brussels, and very dramatically to New York. Maybe you can talk about, you know, I guess you've been in touch with Greta through this year. How has she made the most of the year of COVID and of Zoom?
Yeah, we were all trying to make the most out of Zoom, but I think in that sense, I don't know if you remember, but, and it's of course a small part of the film, but the year when I was following her, I followed for 1 year. She took a sabbatical year on a part of that. So, and then she continued traveling and so on. And what happened in the end of the summer of 2020, it must have been, was that she went back to what we in Sweden call gymnasium, which is kind of equivalent of high school. So in that sense, it was a good timing because, you know, she got into school and so on. And of course, I don't have the same contact with her now as I had when filming. So, but we text some, and so in that sense, I think it's from what I've seen, it's you know, a good time to kind of more get into school. And as we will talk about, of course, in this Q&A, I think a part of the movie and a part of what she's been saying a lot is also that, you know, she always wanted to go back to school and you know, to kind of show the world that also other people need to take responsibility of this in a sense.
We really think of her as someone who speaks truth to power par excellence, and her consistent theme has been that power really isn't listening to her. You know, the people in power will nod and they will give speeches, but she believes that they're not really listening and taking action. And it's very timely that we're talking today, because just yesterday she issued a new video statement 5 years after the Paris Agreement, saying the world is still speeding in the wrong direction.
Yeah, of course, I'm not a climate scientist in that sense. So kind of, but of course, we all know it. I think a few days before this EU top meeting, UN came with a report showing that we're moving towards 3 degrees of global warming, and of course the EU came with some new kind of benchmarks today with what they want to achieve. But it's this weird, you know, world we live in today where the politicians they try, but but even though they push their hardest, still those kind of levels are far off from what's needed. So it's this very special kind of special world, and I think it's something that many young people have been so frustrated about, kind of seeing that sometimes you get applause for doing something which of course is good, but when is it good and when is it so good that we have a safe future? You know, that's probably the issue that we're in right now.
Yeah. So one of the questions that people I think immediately ask about the film, and I've seen it in a lot of reviews, and it was the first thing I wondered about, was when the film starts, you're filming her sitting down for the first time on the pavement in Stockholm in 2018. But you couldn't have known where her story would take her. So how was it that you were filming right from the beginning? How did the project start?
No, but like many documentaries, it started with a tip, actually. So I got a tip from a friend of mine who knew Greta's family a little bit, that she was going to do some kind of a small manifestation outside the Swedish parliament, which is actually just like a few blocks here from the office where I'm today. And me and my boss, we had like a discussion, and I'm like an environmental filmmaker. I've done films not directly on climate change, but kind of in relationship to different environmental topics. And we discussed this, and you know, you couldn't find anything on her. And I Googled, you know, her name, and you could find that she was the daughter of this like Swedish singer, and she had written like an op-ed in the Swedish newspaper that I kind of scribbled through. and it was interesting. And we decided to say that, oh, it's worth a recce, to give it like 1 or 2 days to see if she's a character worth kind of giving it, which is like how we usually kind of do. So I brought a sound engineer and went down to this street and asked her if it was okay that I could, be with her, and was very clear that because she was a young person, and I wanted to be clear that I might leave after half a day, which sometimes I did one of those shoots just last week, and she was cool with it. And it was interesting, of course, to kind of have your headphones on and listen to how she interacted with people passing, and other journalists came. This was before the Swedish election, and outside government there's lots of people, and it was, it formed something, hearing how she kind of talked about climate change in a way which was very interesting. And when we decided, of course, to give it a few more days and follow it through these weeks, that she was going to do something for the election, but it felt very domestic, as something for the Nordic countries, and especially for Sweden, in kind of relationship to what she was saying back then. But of course, now we know how things later on really exploded.
Yeah. So when did they explode? I mean, at what point did Greta's experience actually become a story? When did you know that this was turning into a feature?
No, but I think some people might have been quicker on understanding it. Of course, she got a fair amount of media attention in the beginning, but it was more of a kind of, I don't know, like this kind of, how do you call it, like a flash news thing about this funny, story. It didn't feel that, it didn't have that weight. I think that was why I was a bit reluctant to kind of go into it more kind of full time, because I was like not sure if it would be that big of a story. And it took me a fair bit into the winter of 2018, sometime I think in December, when strikes were starting to pop up in Belgium and Australia, two very kind of different countries in a weird way. And Australia, I think it was in connection to that they were mining for coal, and there were like tens and 15s of thousands of children marching on the streets with signs, saying, we stand with you, Greta, and school strike for climate. And that was when I kind of understood, okay, so the way she speaks about this is starting to translate to other kind of young people that have the same worry, but are in so different kind of cultural contexts. And then we really had a discussion internally, and I decided to go full time on it. And that was also fairly close to this documentary festival in the Scandinavians called Copenhagen Docs. So in that sense, we also were able to kind of move the project a little bit forward, because it was a public service project until then, which was, more, we didn't really know what to go with it.
Yeah. And how did you get her confidence and her parents' confidence?
I think it also relates to that time, in a sense. I think maybe I was lucky in that I was a bit reluctant, and also that the forming of the movement took a bit more time. I think sometimes when we look back at it, we think it just happened in a second. And in the movie, it's compressed, of course, but it's this kind of rainy and wintry period, which is just a montage. And that is a few months, her just sitting in the slushy weather of Sweden. You guys think you have bad weather, you should go here in winter and see how it looks like. And I think for me, and then I didn't have much access, but I kind of kept going, and I kept kind of filming, and I was kind of kept interested in that space, even though I wasn't there every Friday. And I think that thing of a documentary filmmaker, we have the luxury sometimes of being able to spend that time, as our stories are not made, to go out on the news next week or whatever. And I think by doing that, I became a figure that she started to kind of get interested in. And then when she went on to travel, I asked, of course, can I join on one of these trips maybe, and see. And step by step, I spent more and more time with her, and that formed kind of the relationship that became the film.
Yeah. And so you're sitting in the back of the car filming everything on these trips.
Yeah, exactly. It's really kind of, and that's like what I love with my job, which is so interesting, is of course that you get interested in the person. And I think from my perspective, I was interested in Greta from early on, but I was also kind of interested in the movement, and I didn't really know kind of what was what. and then you just have this kind of idea of a person, and people in the Swedish media were, there were lots of interviews with her, kind of 5-minute, these short ones, and lots of kind of analysis and stuff, but there was nothing that really kind of made me understand how her inner monologue sounded like and what she really was. And piece by piece, I just felt like I want to know more. I want to get inside that head. I want to understand this weird kind of crazy story that's taking off from inside her perspective, not from the outside. And I think that was also a part of me, how I presented kind of also why I really needed to kind of go into the car, and why I needed to later on do lots of interviews with her, that took many hours instead of just asking the standard questions. So it's this all curiosity, I think that keeps on going.
What were the interviews like? Because you have a thread all the way through the film, which is her voiceover commentary, which I imagine is culled from those interviews. But how did you do it? I mean, were they like straight interviews, or was it just a more informal process of talking and encouraging her to think aloud? I guess there are different techniques for getting someone to tell you what they're thinking.
No, but I was actually, which was very, very interesting, because early on the strikes, I remember going to the rushes of one of the shoots, and then there was this radio reporter that did an interview with her, and I was like, oh, this is something else. Like, this is better. And it was fairly much the same interview. It was not anything special in that sense. And then when I kind of went into kind of more the later phases of filming, and felt that I wanted to ask her some questions, and I wanted to kind of see how I could almost like research, understand more what was going on with her. I remember that interview, and I used the same technique. So I interviewed her in her bedroom, and I used just like more of a podcast mic, which was like a handheld thing, low, not for high quality, but I was like, I think there's something with this. And it was an interview, but it was also like, I think, a more kind of slow pace, not someone stressing with wanting this or that kind of answer. And when she didn't remember, I was more like open towards that, and she didn't have to talk more about that. And she also then started to kind of read notes from her diary to kind of see, because I know she had taken diary notes from all over the places we've been. And it was really nice kind of process, and it took place during the summer when it was very calm and she was not out kind of traveling. I think it was a time for reflection, in a sense. And that then in the editing formed her kind of her voiceover, and in the original language, if those are the real kind of takes that were in. Actually, many of them are her first kind of readings from the diary that just went so well that we just put it in.
Right. She became a public figure very quickly and very dramatically. How do you negotiate the line between her being, public property, as it were, and a 15-year-old girl, which entails, a particular kind of responsibility?
No, but I think in that sense, I was probably also lucky as a filmmaker, starting on from more of the Swedish context, and getting to kind of know her more as a person, in a sense, and not an icon, more as a teenager than, a screaming, angry person in some UN building. So I think I've always seen her as that kind of more, full person with all those kind of dimensions. And I think that was the person I was curious of. So for me, it was more in the editing, balancing that with adding also kind of all those more public appearances, because of course this is a movie which is broad and it goes out. I think it's sold to practically lots and lots and lots of countries. So we of course need to kind of balance some of the more public appearances to be able to follow the story, because some people do not know much, and then kind of interweave that with the personal kind of narrative that I was very interested in.
Mm-hmm. There are a number of quite intimate scenes in the film, just moments when, for example, you know, her father Svante's trying to persuade her to eat, or that moment when, you know, she's trying to write something and then she gets upset and, you know, just kind of hides in her bed. Were you ever concerned that you might kind of cross the line into being intrusive? Were there moments like that where you say, well, actually, you know, a 15-year-old teenager would be furious to see themselves, you know, represented on screen, you know, with their parents telling them to eat? You know, were there moments that you thought, no, I really need to hold back?
Yeah, of course, there's always moments. I think any documentary that says that there are no ethical concerns are lying you right in the face. That's a really big part of our job, and I think it doesn't actually matter that much if it's, you know, someone homeless, if it's a 15-year-old, even people, you know, adults that we follow. We need to have a kind of a respect. And I was very open to Greta and her family from kind of when I more went into the project, that I need to do my kind of point of view, and I need to do this film from my perspective. But what I can do is that I can say to you guys that we can have a look at it when I'm done, and we can look kind of right by the end of the edit when it's just a few days left, and you can see if there's something that you totally don't kind of recognize with how I portrayed this. If I, you know, take this in a direction which you think is not kind of, yeah, you don't recognize that as the situation you were in. And in that sense, I had that openness. And what was so interesting, and of course, I didn't know how they were going to react, and especially Greta, who's so stubborn, can be, you know, hard to kind of reason with in that sense. So it was I was putting it out there, but it was interesting because when she saw the film, what kind of struck her was that she recognized herself. And I think not to kind of brag, because I think it's so hard to kind of create a portrait of anyone. If I would portray you, I have kind of no idea if that's really how you see yourself or so. But it was interesting hearing her say then, after seeing it, you know, that she recognized herself more, and that kind of image of her as very one-dimensional and stoic that was kind of in the media, that was something she maybe didn't recognize. But the more nerdy and three-dimensional view that she saw in the film was something she recognized, and she didn't want to remove anything. Actually, it was quite the opposite. She wanted to add, you know, in the sense of adding more of everything, which of course is the feeling you get when we have to remove so many. Yeah, it becomes short when we're doing a feature film. So I tried to have some kind of an openness in that sense.
Yeah, and you have these moments which I think would completely change many people's impression of her, but like the moments where she just completely cracks up laughing, seeing the picture of her dad with the Pope.
Yeah, but it's and I think that's so. I think from my perspective, when I think of people, and this is probably a little bit Swedish, I don't know, but it's like when you see public figures, you kind of you want to know that they're kind of what we call in Sweden lagom. It's like no ordinary, or like the gray, you know, boring sides of how your life looks like. And I think sometimes we forget that these public figures, whoever they are, they have all these sides. And I think when it comes to Greta especially, it's so interesting how many parts of the world have, you know, maybe because it's easier when you frame a story to kind of create this very kind of easy contour of someone who's just a screaming, angry girl who's, you know, deceased with this, you know, and you create something which is so one-dimensional. And I think it's something we need to be mindful of not doing too much when it comes to all people in the kind of public sphere, to understand that they are human beings.
Yeah. What was the impression you got when you were accompanying her to all these places? What was the impression of the way that, you know, institutions were responding to her? Because early on in the film, we see her seated at the table next to Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. And did you ever, I mean, I was wondering, watching the film, how much certain organizations and politicians and institutions quickly latched onto her because they knew that they could use her to get good press. Or am I being too skeptical there?
No, but I think that's a really good question. And of course, something I was interested in. I would have killed to to get into the mailboxes of Guterres and see how all these discussions must go with who they're into kind of inviting and why. Of course, it's hidden to the public, and that's sad. But I think that many politicians sadly have had a hard time kind of tackling this issue, and they understood kind of with Greta and the school strikers and other kind of movements that this was, of course, something that was rising within the public kind of knowledge, and that people were getting kind of more and more worried, seeing that not much was happening, even though it was lots of talking. So then maybe people thought that, okay, but this is, if we invite her, we've kind of ticked off that box. And I definitely got that feeling. But what was so interesting, and that was also why I really wanted to get into some of these rooms, which is of course very hard as a independent filmmaker, because I wanted to see if Greta really kind of kept on saying the same kind of truth to power as she was to us in more public arenas when she was more kind of alone with the leaders, in a sense, to see if she understood that she was being used or not. And what I found was that she probably understood that she was being used most of everyone, in a sense. I think it comes from her being very, as you see in the film, sometimes cynical and very almost humorous in this dark way. And I think she's not the person who kind of who didn't understand that was a part of the game, and I think she understood that she still could use that, but keep on attacking them, but with them side by side to her. And I think the meeting with Macron in the movie is a classic one of those where he's maybe more used to the nice French kids kind of bowing, but she keeps sluggering on. And what's fun with that meeting is she's actually the one kind of ending the meeting, which is so special in a sense. Where you have a world leader, she's the one saying like, I think you need, like, okay, now I think we've discussed this enough. So it's been really interesting to see her in those arenas in a sense.
That scene is great because it also gives a real sense of her self-awareness and her sense of humor when she says to him, I'm a nerd. But the self-awareness comes out where it becomes apparent really early on that she's skeptical about being in the spotlight. She is not impressed by herself, and she knows that, her moment in the spotlight could be brief.
Yeah, and I think one thing which is very kind of funny and I think very Greta-ish, and I think it says a lot about everything and also some interesting things of the movie as well, is that I think she said in an interview that she likes the film a lot, and all the things that we talked about. But in Swedish and the Scandinavian countries it's called Greta, but in the US it's called I Am Greta. And then she was like, but the US title, I think it makes me look like I'm taking myself so serious. But I am not. So that was the only thing she was kind of, and I think it says a lot about, as you say, how she's never seen herself in any way as a messiah in this issue, or that she would become this very famous activist, and taking herself so serious. I think I think she's always went into this with feeling that I'm going to do as much as I can, and trying this thing with a strike, and then the rest is what you can really kind of see in the film, this kind of roller coaster that just kind of kicks off. And that was also why I felt it was so important to do the film from her perspective, because if there's anything who's kind of interesting, if you have the ability to follow something from when it's happening, it's of course to kind of see if you can help the viewer to get into the head of this protagonist that we've been kind of hearing about so much from the outside, and that's why I really wanted to help the viewer to be with her in this very special time.
Yeah, I'm going to follow on from that question in a second, but I'm just going to give everyone the heads up that in a few moments we will move over to Q&A. So if you'd like to start typing your questions in, we'll go to those shortly. But you said you wanted to put the audience into her head. Is that why you decided not to interview people around her? Like you don't have, you didn't interview her parents in the film, or,
no, but I felt,
friends or teachers or anything?
No, but I think that's definitely, and I think what's so important when you when you make a movie like this is that you could do it in 1,000 ways. And this is also a film that I knew. I have, my colleagues said to me, they laughed me in the face sometime when she was getting, very famous, and said, you're doing the impossible film, because whatever you do, it's going to be wrong. And that's, true, because it's like an impossible story to tell, because everyone have their opinion and their kind of view of it. And if you start inviting people and doing kind of a talking heads movie, then you're doing something else, and then the point of view is changing, and okay, rack on. If you're interviewing the teachers, then you interview, and you continue, and it becomes something else. And I felt in the material that I have enough perspective from kind of news archive that I can use. I have enough perspective from the parents as kind of sideliners. I have enough perspective from these kind of from these world leaders and their reactions, their faces, in these kind of some verite scenes where you see how they kind of react to her speeches and how they feel. So why have kind of drizzle it down with lots of talking heads? Then that's another. Then you're doing something else, something maybe more conventional in a sense.
Yeah.
And someday probably someone will do like a biopic of her, but that's not something you can do. This is like a prequel.
Yeah.
This is like a prequel to how she became the person, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think people have, you have misunderstandings of how, when you can kind of even do a biopic in that sense.
Yeah. You talked about the responses of some world leaders. Of course, some world leaders have responded appallingly. And, one of the really shocking things in the film is, you collate the horrible comments that people like Trump and Bolsonaro and Piers Morgan. Okay, Piers Morgan's not a world leader. He may think he is. But it's really shocking, the things they say about her. And we see her watching some of these attacks. And apparently taking it in good humor, and we know, she's kept us entertained with her very mischievous responses to Trump's tweets. But how much do you think she's really affected by all that? I mean, it must be quite something at her age to hear, not just the world idolizing you, but attacking you quite viciously.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the things that I was so interested in to understand. And it took a fair bit of time, actually, because she didn't interact much with that kind of material. And then this scene played out, which is in the film, where she kind of starts she's on her kind of phone, and then I don't know, she must have kind of bounced into some article, and she starts to kind of read some of those comments. And it was the only time I actually saw her kind of interact with the hatred. And I think that's something many people who are kind of attacked in that way by lots of kind of anonymous haters and these weird accounts. I think in some way you start to think, why should I kind of consume all this kind of jitterish stuff? And I also kind of following the movement and being in those kind of spheres. It was interesting seeing, because you said like young people, and of course it's horrendous that young people are getting attacked, and they should not be, and they should definitely pursue anything to the police if it's illegal. And Greta has done that, and one person in Sweden has actually been convicted for a death threat. So that's how this should be handled. But I think many people in that generation also have they've grown up with social media, and I think some of them have understood that this is a very toxic environment where you have all these kind of haters just kind of roaming around, and that you maybe don't have to really kind of dive into that, which I think actually is a little bit different where older people tend to be, when they read something on Facebook, they really believe it. And I've seen studies where young people generally have a better tendency of knowing some of these issues on the web.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to put out the call again for questions, because we do have another 10 minutes or so. So if you'd like to get some in. Oh, well, there's one right up now. So okay, so this is from Kathy Carroll, who says, is there an organised Greta movement on what to do to curb global warming, people think she speaks without proposing action.
Yeah, and I think, hi, Kathy. No, but I think what's been interesting following kind of, I think when I don't know what you mean with Greta movement, but I think they, it's a weird kind of grassroots thing. So I think in the UK it's called School Strike for Climate. Here in Sweden and Germany it's called Fridays for Future. So, but the school strike movement, I will call it, I think they've been very open about that they kind of are young people that don't have the solutions in a sense, and saying that some of the solutions are there, some are not, but the focus has always been to kind of, we need to highlight this crisis and we need to treat it as a crisis. And I must actually say, just like you did, your kind of gut feeling that when that thing came up with treating the crisis as a crisis, I actually remember in the editing room, I was like, I don't understand that. What does that mean? Like we need to create some context or take it out. And then this pandemic came, and then I saw, okay, so this is kind of how a crisis is treated. So that means that you're putting all your efforts and all your focus onto it. It means that you're prioritizing it, even though you really don't exactly know how to treat it. And I think that's what they have been calling on, and that's how you kind of solve it. And of course, I think we will get out of this pandemic to a little bit quicker and a little bit less kind of bouncy because of that crisis reaction. And when it comes to the climate crisis, these young people are very kind of sad and frustrated because they don't see that kind of action. So I think that's what they're focusing on. They're not the scientists coming up with windmills or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. More questions, please. Did you feel nervous? And indeed, did Greta and her parents feel nervous at the point at which she became a public figure? Did you ever think, uh-oh, this is getting out of control now? How is she going to be able to handle it? How are they going to be able to handle it?
Yes, definitely. And I think in a sense, she became a public figure like almost directly, in the sense that it became this, as we talked about, kind of a media gimmick thing already when it was in the Swedish parliament strike at the beginning. So I don't know, and in a sense, as a documentarian, I was never able to kind of capture any before and after in that sense, because I didn't know her from before, and I didn't have that kind of footage. But I think maybe to some extent, the family has been used to being to some extent in the public, with the mother being fairly famous kind of Swedish singer, and so that might have helped. But I think that the film really kind of shows from her perspective how kind of what it is becoming a public figure, and also some of the implications when it comes to everyone wanting you to kind of answer up for this kind of huge issue, which we've had so many people discussing for ages, and suddenly it seems like the world is hoping for you to kind of fix it, and what kind of a stress that means, and so on. And of course, as a documentarian, that's something something you're really kind of watching closely when you're following something like this take place. And I think it was an important part of the story that this became.
Right. We've got a question from Robert Mitchell, who asks, how was the trip across the Atlantic by boat for you? It looked hard for Greta, in brackets. And did you also travel back by boat with her?
Yes, it was bumpy. And I think I always say, in a sense, that I'm so lucky to be able to be a filmmaker, in a sense that it's so hard. I think it's hard to even speak about Greta, in a sense, because I think it's told so much better when in scenes, and you kind of bring the viewer to those moments. And it's the same with the boat ride. but I can tell you a small kind of anecdote, I think, which says a lot about how afraid I was. And it was before we went. First of all, before kind of when she told me that she was posting on social media that she looked for someone to kind of hitchhike over the Atlantic. Already by then I was kind of, oof, maybe I should kind of find someone else to film this specific part. But then I talked to the captain when she got invited to follow them, and he seemed cool. But I remember before stepping onto the boat the first time I saw it in the harbor of Plymouth, I had this kind of notion that I wanted to kind of knock onto the hull, because I just felt like this looks so thin. And you know, going into these boats, it was just like nothing. So I was shit scared actually, going out. And I think actually Greta was definitely more kind of cool with it in a sense. And actually on the boat ride, I think she got used to it kind of more quickly. Me and one of the captains were battling more seasickness and so on. So it's hard sometimes to know who kind of tackles these environments best and so on. Yep. And when it comes to traveling back, I was pretty fed with the Atlantic. So of course I took a flight back, which was actually one of the, I looked up if I could take like one of these, what's it called in English, like a cargo ship. But of course those use kind of a very thick bunker oil, and it seemed to be not very much better. But it was sad in a sense, because we had been able to do the film just traveling by train and electric cars following her, which became kind of very easy when I was filming in Europe. So I was a little bit proud of it. Oh, this is good. But of course, sailing back was not on the target.
Yeah, and throughout the filming, you were trying to do things where you Greta's way, and kind of living up to her rigorous standards of environmental responsibility.
Yeah, I think in a sense, I felt, of course, following her on these journeys in Europe, I was following filming, and then I actually got used to traveling that way and felt that it was in line with the film. So that was not a problem, even though it took some time traveling. In Sweden is, of course, as you know, a bit far out. But I think it's funny. One other anecdote, which probably says a lot about that I don't live by Greta standards, was one time we were traveling through Copenhagen in Denmark. And I, as always, I tend to not plan my meals very well. And I just kind of grabbed some stuff and jumped onto the train and ate that stuff. And it was in plastic containers. And I just, placed that on the table in front of me, and I didn't think much of it. But that, of course, got captured in a picture that Greta published. And it wasn't her, containers. But she was, of course, harassed and attacked for those containers that was actually mine. And I think it was a good reminder to me as well to think always of how important it is for us as documentarians when we kind of when we follow along and when we decide to do something where we kind of follow an active kind of activist in that sense, how important it is to kind of step back and to kind of let that activism flow and not kind of interfere with it in a sense, and just kind of capture what happens and not kind of fuss around with it in that sense.
Possibly this answers the next question, but I'll ask it anyway because you may have more to say. And it's from Ben Southwell, who asks, how has making the film affected your own behavior with regards to climate?
Ben, I don't eat. I eat from plastic containers still. but of course, it's. I think one thing which the film has made strongly for me, and I think it's been very open, and the discussion in Sweden has been really big about this. It's been a big hit here in Sweden with lots of people discussing this kind of having the lens of Greta and kind of getting inside her head, and how you start to kind of see some detailing of your world in different ways. Like that carbon dioxide and like pressure on the planet isn't just coming out from your gas pipe. It's if you renovate your kitchen just because you think it's the wrong color, or if you decide to you really want that iPhone 12, but but actually your iPhone is pretty new. All these kind of consumer choices. They affect actually a lot, and I think that was definitely something new for me, seeing that, putting on those glasses more often and asking myself, do I really kind of need that? What does it give to me? Like, is it super necessary or not? And then you tend to say, okay, but I'll use this phone a few years more. I'll change the battery. I think it works well. And, so it's more those changes, I think.
Right. So we've got time for a last question. And this one is from Alan Stewart, who asks, who among the world leaders featured do you think Greta felt was the most genuine, if any?
Oh, that's a great question. I have actually, you do so many Q&As. I've never heard that. I always just hear from the other side. No, but who could that be? Good question. Oh, but I remember he's just like shortly in the film. He's the Austrian, I think, Prime Minister, or I don't remember if it's the President or Prime Minister, van der Bellen. But I remember that meeting he as fairly nice, and he was one of those kind of more like a leader that didn't want to talk much, but more wanted to listen. And I remember him as good as someone asking kind of open questions and really not, otherwise they tend to try to kind of be proclamating and so on. So maybe he was really one. And I think he had this small dog, some rescue dog or something that was also there, which was nice.
Yeah. Macron seemed thoughtful as well. Seemed like he was listening. Yeah,
but I think, and in that sense, I definitely think that these leaders have been like open in the sense to inviting, and I think that's been good. But of course, it is tough. I understand their issue in the sense that they are so locked in. I think some of them definitely, they're smart people. They understand that what they are doing now will definitely influence the world of their grandchildren, and they are worried, I think, about that. But at the same time, they're probably even more worried about losing their jobs, and about the current kind of gallop and what that shows. And I think that's, of course, something we need to as a world talk more about, how we can be more long term, because that shouldn't be the way we reason.
Yeah. Well, I'll just wrap up by asking you two things. First of all, what are you working on now?
Yeah, a few projects. Actually, as you see, there's lots of hard drives here, so lots of things to go through. But I have two different projects that I'm starting to pursue. So today I did the first interview for a new kind of thing that I'm looking at for. I can't, of course, talk more about it, but it feels nice I had some vacation, and it feels nice to start moving again.
Mm-hmm. And finally, what will be your wish for Greta in 2021?
No, but I think there's interesting in this what these young strikers have been talking about, in the sense of different kind of reactions to crises. And I think if there's something which of course would be interesting is if the political world would, and I think we as people in the world would kind of form our understanding of how a crisis reaction kind of looks like, and understand that some of that we can actually really need to be able to kind of change the world when it comes to climate change. And also these kind of billions and billions and billions of euros and dollars that has been suddenly just, taken out of the ground, in a sense, for this health crisis. Let's use them to solve the even bigger kind of future crisis. I think not doing that would be very irresponsible, not to kind of try to tie these crises together, in a sense.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's hope we're all in a better place next year, and let's hope that the message of Greta and everyone who's been inspired by her continues to be listened to. Nathan, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you all very much for listening and watching, and for your questions. And it's been a real pleasure. And
thank you, Jonathan.
Happy holidays.
And thank you all for the great questions as well. Bye.
Bye.